Thank you for joining Asia's best radio station.
Download latest podcasts of Carry On Harry Show on iTunes.
Now shake hands with celebrities on Singapore talk show Carry On Harry.
Inviting music composers, producers, artists on board on Carry On Harry Talk Show for connecting you to worldwide audience. Write to Harry Johal at carryonharry.com or visit www.carryonharry.com for more details.
Hello.
A very good morning to you, Mr. Davis.
And a good morning to you as well, young man. How are you?
I'm good. I'm perfectly fine, and I'm very much excited, to have you on my show, since you have got an expertise in something, which is related to the energy flow, how to unleash our potential, and how we can transform our life. And I know with this interaction, a lot of people are going to learn a lot of things from your expertise. So I'm really, really very excited, sir.
Excellent. I'm excited too. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. So first of all, Mr. Davis, I want to know more about you, like what sort of coaching you provide, and it affects what all areas of our life. What does it deal in?
Okay. Are we recording now?
Yes, we are in the process of recording. Yes.
Right. Okay. Sorry about that. Right. So I work with a whole range of people, from people that are looking for more satisfaction, more fulfillment in life. Maybe they feel a little bit lost, they may feel a little bit confused, a little bit overwhelmed. They want life. So I work with executives within a business setting, people that, as I say, just want to feel better or perform better at work, at home, all the way through to people that are chronically ill with things like anxiety, depression, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, adrenal fatigue, irritable bowel syndrome. So there's a very broad spectrum of people that I work with. But the essence of my work, which is called Energy Flow Coaching, is really this may sound strange, but it's sort of the same approach. It's tailored, obviously, to each individual person, but it's the same underlying theory, the same foundation that forms the basis of my work with everybody, from whether it's an executive looking to improve their performance or somebody that is housebound with chronic fatigue syndrome.
Correct. So you mean to say all these symptoms which you have discussed, like pain, fatigue, headache, inflammation, these are all somewhere related to some other problem rather than these are the physical ailments?
I guess to a certain extent. So my hypothesis is that, and I think there are increasing numbers of people that are aligning with this viewpoint, is that symptoms are a manifestation of a deeper problem. Symptoms are the body's way of trying to tell us that something is not quite right. And obviously, different people experience different types of symptoms, and there's probably a number of reasons for that. One of them being genetics, and we're all predisposed to experience certain types of health challenges. So one person may get migraines, another person may get anxiety, another person may get fatigue. And whilst these are all different, and the manifestation obviously in the body is different, I believe there's potential for there to be overlap in what causes those, the reason why the body is producing those symptoms. Now, I do think one of the important things is that we often like to view things in a simple way, which is ideal, but we often like to think that there is a single cause to problems, to health problems, and therefore we're looking at a single solution. And whilst the solution can be simple in nature, but not necessarily easy to put into practice, I think that when it comes to many chronic health problems, there probably is a number of primary causes. And I guess the issue with that is that and to try to, I hope I'm not waffling or getting confusing here, but I believe if I go back to your question, the link that connects these sorts of health challenges that I'm talking about is a mind and body in a continual state of stress. And that doesn't, now we have to kind of define stress in a particular way, because I think often people think that stress is some external event that is happening and I have a sort of agitated feeling. Well, stress is kind of a little bit different to that. Stress is far more than an agitated feeling that we have. I would say actually the agitated body feeling people have when they believe they're stressed. Oh, I'm overloaded at work, I feel stressed out. I would say that's an emotional feeling much more than the body in a state of stress. So there's two very important things about stress. I think it's that people need to really, I think it's useful to understand when looking at kind of health challenges as being caused by a body in a perpetual state of stress. The first thing is that it's possible for our mind and body to be in a state of stress without us being aware of it. And what often happens is that the body can, for one reason or another, it could be stress, it could be trauma, it could be a series of events that have happened, but our body can get stuck into a stress response, and that can happen outside of our conscious awareness. So I think it's very important to know that you may be in your mind may think that you're perfectly happy, but your body may be in a perpetual state of stress, and you don't necessarily have to be, have significant external events for that to be happening. So that's the first thing. The second, the first point. The second important point about stress is that there's a whole host of different things, be they physical, emotional, that can trigger the stress response in exactly the same way. So you could have a physical injury, you could have like a car accident, you could have a viral infection, like a case of flu, you could have some sort of emotional overload, you could lose a job, or any kind of emotional build-up, and the stress response in the body is exactly the same. So things like, even things like very strenuous exercise will trigger the stress response. A bad diet will trigger the stress response. If we're taking a lot of drugs, if we are drinking a lot of alcohol, if we're not sleeping correctly, all of these things will contribute to. They all trigger the stress response in pretty much the same way, and this is why.
Whom you're trying to reach is currently unavailable. Please leave a message after the beep.
Hello?
Hi.
Yes, I think the line dropped somewhere in between, but we were discussing the point number 2 that you were referring to. We move ahead from there, sir.
Right, okay. So the second point is that there are a whole host of different things that can cause the exact same stress response in the body. So we often think that mind and body are separate, but when we look at stress, we realise this is the one point where we can realise that actually mind and body are one. So If you have a physical injury, that can trigger the stress response. You could fall down a flight of stairs, you could have a car accident, you could be hit over the head with a frying pan. That will trigger the stress response in the body, as well as obviously the physical injury that you have. You could have a viral infection that will trigger the stress response. You could have an emotional build-up or blocked emotion that will trigger the stress response. Even strenuous exercise, a bad diet, excessive drug intake, lack of sleep, all of these things trigger the stress response in exactly the same way. So what often happens is if we have a number of these things, and they build up. The metaphor I like to use is having a stress bucket. And when we have a number of these things that build up, basically our stress bucket gets full. And when our stress bucket gets full, our body responds by sending us symptoms of a health challenge. And that could be symptoms of pain, symptoms of fatigue, a migraine, it could be anxiety. So there's a number of different types of symptoms that will manifest as a result. But the important thing is we have to get rid of this idea of that mind and body are separate, because mind and body are one. So this very usually happens over a period of time where people's stress bucket gets full, where there's a number of things that take place that continue to trigger that stress response. And then basically the stress response gets stuck on, and usually what happens is that sufferers are not aware that their body is in a state of stress. Wow. But what they then just experience is a whole vast array of symptoms.
Wow, that sounds really epic information, that how our mind and body, they are interconnected, but we, by taking or we can say that just by lack of knowledge about this kind of an information, whenever we feel stressed or whenever we see those symptoms coming to us like headache, migraine, we just suppress it by taking medication. But the actual the root cause of that migraine or that headache could be something which we are not aware about. We might be feeling happy about certain things, but there are some underlying pressures which are building up within our body, which are causing these kind of symptoms to be appearing. So that is where therapists like yourself who steps in to help us release that emotional stress that is somewhere hidden, and there must be some specific way to get to know about that stress, and that is where a good therapist steps in. So when a person is detected with this kind of a stress happening, how does a therapist can really lead a person to have a sound mind as well, along with having a sound body?
Well, as I say, for me, mind and body are most certainly one and connected, and each affects the other. The brain and the body are definitely one. As I say, I think this is very relevant when it comes to talking about our emotion. Historically, we have thought that emotion is something that takes place in our head. So we think some thoughts and we have some emotional feelings. And of course, we've had an entire industry that has been based around, if you want to change your life, change your thoughts and then you'll change your feelings. But what we're beginning to learn through science, and I think people intuitively know this, is that actually a lot of our feeling affects a lot of our thinking. So what science tells us, what neuroscience tells us now, is that our emotional processing occurs at far higher speeds than our cognitive processing. So what that effectively means is that all of our emotion affects all of our thinking, and emotion is a biological process. And I think for the most part we often think we're rational beings where we're making our decisions from a space of free will, but usually we're not. We're making our decisions based on biological urges, and emotion is one of those basic biological urges. So it's a complex physiological process that is affecting all of the body and all of the brain, all of the major organs in the brain. So we have neurons in our heart, we have neurons in our gut, and this is why when people have what they say is a gut feeling, there is genuine intelligent activity taking place in their gut. So the heart and the gut communicate very effectively with the midbrain, which is the kind of the non-conscious or non-thinking part of the brain, and then that is the starting point of emotion in the body. And then the thinking centers of the brain, the frontal lobes, then come online. And what happens is the activity within the frontal lobes and the higher thinking centers really kicks in. So once between gut, heart and midbrain has taken place. So this is, I think, when we begin to understand that idea that, well, our emotion, our feelings are affecting our thinking, it takes us down a different route. There's been so much therapy based on the idea of trying to change how you think. So my notions of my process of energy flow coaching is really about getting back into the body and getting back into feeling, because just as you were saying as part of your question to me, Harry, was that it's possible for us to shut down our feelings, but it doesn't mean that emotion stops being produced underneath. And a good example of this is a good book I read a number of years ago. Was called Healing Without Prozac and Freud by a psychiatrist in the US called Dr. David Servan-Schreiber. And in his book, he talks about a piece of research that he was doing where he was mapping emotion in the brain, and what he was doing was showing people some disturbing or uncomfortable films, and while he was doing that, he was measuring their heart rate, measuring their blood pressure, and measuring the activity of the emotional brain, or the midbrain, the limbic brain. And he said he had one lady in watching this film, and he was looking at her readings, and her heart rate was particularly high, and her blood pressure was getting high, and the activity of her emotional brain was pretty frantic. And he was then thinking, oh my God, this lady is in a deep state of stress. I'd better go and check she's okay. So he walks into the lab and he says, are you okay? Do you want me to turn this film off? And she looks at him with an element of surprise on her face and says, oh no, I'm perfectly fine. I feel perfectly fine. I'm quite happy watching this. So what that showed to him was that she was able to disconnect her conscious awareness and her thinking brain from the stress that her body was under. So he was measuring a stress response in her body of, say, with elevated heart rate, elevated blood pressure, and a fairly frantic or active midbrain. Yet her conscious thinking brain was completely oblivious to that. Now, I think that my sense of it is with that, this wasn't the kind of point of his book, but my belief is, and I guess what my work is based on, is that lady is likely to become unwell with some symptoms at some point, because if she's unable to detect when her body is in a state of stress, she'll get to that point where her body will become stuck in that stress response, and then her stress bucket is full, and then that overload then results in symptoms of one sort or another. So my belief is that rather than following types of therapy that focus on trying to change our thinking is or certainly conscious thinking is a manifestation of, or an end product of, emotion in the body. So my belief is what we need to be doing is getting into our body and training ourselves to feel, because I think we've become very disconnected from our physical body and our feeling selves. And I think this happens either through trauma or just because of everyday life, of wanting to fit in and to get by, to doing well, to being liked, all that kind of stuff. So I think, and that lady included, I think she could be trained to feel again, if that makes sense. To get back into a body and to learn to feel. And I think that's the most crucial thing that we need to do. And this is why, going back to what I was saying, is that I deal with such a range of people, because whether somebody feels lost or confused or overwhelmed in their life, or whether they have symptoms of a chronic health challenge, the key thing that connects it is that the people I work with have become disconnected from what I would say is their true self, their feeling self, their intelligent body. So my work is about helping people get back in touch with their emotional feelings, their intuitive feelings, their true self. And if I'm working with somebody with with chronic symptoms, then I'm using those chronic symptoms as a clue. So it's the idea that, you mentioned migraine and taking pills. That's often what we do, isn't it? Is that when we have a health challenge, we have symptoms, we often want to get rid of those symptoms as quickly as we possibly can. And understandably so. But what we need to be doing is, rather than trying to get rid of those symptoms and thinking they're horrible, evil invaders, I think it's important that we understand why the symptom is there and look at a symptom as being a tap on the shoulder from a body that is trying to get our attention. So, if you have a migraine headache, whilst you want to get over that as quickly as possible, there is a reason that your body is sending you that migraine headache. And there'll be a number of things probably in your stress bucket, and a chunk of those will be some emotional things that you're probably not feeling, you're probably suppressing at an unconscious level. And we would need to go and find out what's in your stress bucket and identify why is it my body is sending me this symptom of migraine. So I think that it's a specific. The therapy is using symptoms as a key. So it's the idea that symptoms are useful because our body is trying to get our attention, to tell us that we need to pay attention to something, to tell us that our stress bucket is full. So rather than just working on symptoms, it's the idea that really we need to understand the cause of symptoms, because if we don't understand the cause of symptoms, then the symptoms will either persist or they'll kind of change into something else.
Fantastic. And I think it's because of all this knowledge that you have got in your profession. You have consolidated every information in your first book, The Intelligent Body, Reversing Chronic Fatigue and Pain from Inside Out, which is also available on Amazon. And I would recommend my listeners that if you are searching for some good information about the kind of knowledge that Dr. Kylie Davis is sharing with us, do search for his name or the book, The Intelligent Body, Reversing Chronic Fatigue and Pain from Inside Out. The information that I am receiving from Dr. Kylie is immense, and I am very much sure that a lot of other things would have been discussed in the book itself. But moving forward, sir, like you mentioned that there is a process of discovering, all these, things through energy flow coaching. But is there a process also of, reversing the things which have already, done damage to our body? Let's say, for example, people suffering from diabetes with pancreas failed. Do you think that these things can also be, reversed through energy flow coaching?
That's a great question, actually. I think that I would say so. If we what we're beginning to see is that there is increasing acceptance within mainstream healthcare that stress and emotional stress play a role in a whole range of health problems, particularly chronic health problems. So even certain types of cancers, heart disease can be seen to be, affected, or at some level. As I say, I think there's often a combination of causes, and the way I look at it is almost like having a combination lock. So if you think about a combination lock, when all the numbers are lined up, then the lock opens. And I think this is the same with many chronic health challenges, is that those things in the stress bucket combined with our genetic lineage, our natural wiring, impact whether we then experience symptoms. Now, it's difficult really for me to answer the question to a certain extent, because all the health challenges I've worked with, chronic fatigue, adrenal fatigue, fibromyalgia, migraine, anxiety, depression, with all of those health conditions, the symptoms are reversible because there is no structural damage within the body. So with chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, adrenal fatigue, currently these conditions are all diagnosed through exclusion. So what that means is that if a sufferer goes to their doctor and they report the symptoms, their doctor will conduct a series of blood tests, and those blood tests will come back negative. And then if symptoms persist, that means essentially that the doctor can't find anything structurally wrong in the body. Now then, through a diagnosis of exclusion, a doctor would then offer a diagnosis of chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, depending on the symptom type. Now, of course, when you've got heart disease, for example, there is this structural damage in the body. Now, I've never actually worked with anyone with heart disease, and what I would say is, well, yeah, you probably do need to. Obviously, there's going to be some medical intervention that is required, but I would say that in terms of from that point forward, often what we'll hear is that, well, I need to change my diet.
Correct.
And that would be absolutely right, and that would be one of those things, because we know that a bad diet triggers the stress response, and obviously a bad diet can affect a number of other things. But my guess would be that the type of emotional work that we do in energy flow coaching would have a significant health benefit for somebody that had, say, had heart problems. If that person was looking to improve their health, the three pillars for health are effective processing and regulation of our emotion, nutrition, good nutrition, and exercise. Those are really the three pillars. Those are the three things that we can do something about. Well, the thing that sort of concerns me at present is that I think there's too much focus on diet and exercise. People are in a space at the moment where they think that if they sort their diet and exercise, that'll be a panacea for everything. They'll solve everything. Whereas I think those two are hugely important. I think nutrition more so than exercise, but I think that the emotional piece is the most important. So I think it goes in terms of importance. I think it's emotion and emotional stress, nutrition, exercise. Now, that's my intuitive theory. So I don't. That's I'm not basing that on lab research. That's my personal belief. But I think that
it's just like
if you look at any health challenge, yes, it is. It would be of benefit.
Fantastic. I think we can, in simple word, explain it this way, that, the exercise part, the medication part, the food that we eat, is all like hardware, which we can see with our physical eyes. But, dealing with our mind is something, which is more related to making a person, change the habits, change the paradigms, is more about, changing the internal system and beliefs, so that the person, becomes more on the positive side. It's just like the software of that hardware. When the hardware and software, they work together, the more symphony is, seen as in the form of the results. Can we say it that way?
If I'm honest with you, I don't know. I don't know really, because I'm not sure that exercise and diet are necessarily any different from processing our emotion. I wouldn't. That doesn't feel right to me to say that exercise and diet are hardware and emotion is software, because I think that in terms of the biological processes that take place in the body, exercise can at some level have the same impact on brain functioning as processing of emotion. So in terms of the impact and what goes on, it's sort of the same. It's really the same as me saying to you that that you could literally take a blow to your head and there'd be damage to your brain, and you could have an emotional trauma. The damage to the brain could be exactly the same.
Correct.
So I think even though from the outside these things look very, very different, I think in terms of what takes place in the body, they're not that different. I mean, just to give an example of that head thing, years ago I was watching a program about serial killers, and essentially what it was saying was that almost all serial killers had experienced extreme abuse as children, and this emotional and physical abuse had led to a rewiring, a restructuring of their brain. And the few that had not been subject to abuse and trauma as children had head damage. So they'd had an accident where they'd had a blow to the head, and what they'd found was that the blow to the head, the resulting rewiring and changes in the brain had been similar to the changes that had arisen through the trauma that the others had experienced. So in terms of the outcome of that, the outcome is kind of the same. So I think even though things can look different from the outside, what actually takes place in brain and body is very similar. So that's why the sort of hardware software idea doesn't ring true for me. I'm sorry that I'm not trying to poo-poo your ideas there, but it may be that it is a good way of saying it, but if it doesn't resonate with me.
Just like from a common man point of view, that thoughts and all these things which are going on inside the head, which we can't see it with our physical eye, basically are the kind of software that we are living in. And if the software itself is producing negative results, that means we have to meet somebody like your expertise, who can really help out, and pull us out of that anxiety, depression feeling, or, facing those chronic fatigue or the pain symptoms that we are facing. And once again, I want to remind my listeners that do pay a visit to our guest website, KylieDavis.net. You will be able to get a lot of information related to all these day-to-day health issues like depression, chronic fatigue, anxiety, panic disorder, and a lot of things which are very wonderfully drafted into the website itself. So do remember the website KylieDavis.net. And moving ahead, sir, you have written this wonderful book, The Intelligent Body. I want to know a little bit more about what is the structural way of expressing and bringing this all information together. Tell us a little bit about the book itself.
The book kind of lays bare the energy flow process. So it's designed as to be a nice, easy read, and it's really designed for everyone, really. But I would say everyone can get something from it. So it's what I'm doing in essence is I'm explaining this stress disease connection, how this idea of stress and our emotion, how that leads to physical changes in the body and symptoms of a health challenge. I also so it's in two parts. So the first part offers the kind of the background understandings of all that, and I put in some stories and I put in bits of research, but it's very light in the kind of academic sense. So it's meant to be kind of easy reading. In the second part, I then take people through really the essence of the energy flow coaching process, which, as I say, is useful for somebody who just wants to feel better about themselves or wants to perform better in life, or for somebody that has symptoms of a health challenge. So that's the idea of the book. It's the title would have you believe that it's specifically about chronic fatigue and pain, and I guess it's a little bit more targeted at that, but it's sort of a general audience, in as much as what I'm trying to do is give people this idea that mind and body are connected, stress and emotion are the keys to what brings mind and body together, and they play a huge role in our health, our happiness, and really by applying the principles outlined in the book, a person can improve their performance in life, improve their health, improve their well-being, improve their sense of purpose and meaning, and really get in touch with who they are. Because that's a big part of the book, that's a big part of my work, is that it's helping people find themselves. And we do that by getting into our body, getting into our feelings, because that gives us a closer idea of who we are than just paying attention to the thoughts in our head, because many of the thoughts in our head are just the result of our conditioning, our programming, our upbringing, and all the rest of it. So thoughts are often an illusion, really, rather than some reflection of either who we are or reality out there. So I think our true self, as I would say, tends to communicate with us through intuitive feelings and deeper feelings. And what we need to be doing is getting in touch with that true self, with our intuitive, innate wisdom, if you will. So the book really teaches people how to do that. And when we get in touch with our true self, then we begin to unleash our potentials in all sorts of ways. So we unleash our potentials for healing ourselves, for performing better at work, for being a better parent, for being more likely to experience happiness, more likely to experience a sense of fulfillment and meaning in life. And as I say, helping us to self-correct and self-heal when we're experiencing symptoms.
Wonderful. And I think you are doing a great service, by helping our people, to overcome, these mind issues which are somewhere underlying, and they are there, but we think that they don't exist. So more information, as I told earlier to my listeners, that can be derived from the website www.kyliedavis.net, and you can watch a couple of videos, you can watch podcasts that are released by Dr. Kylie Davis, and he has shared with us some of his expertise on the show. So before we end today's talks with you, any tips that you would love to share with the listeners? How can we really stress release ourselves in our day-to-day life? What would you recommend?
Just as a starting point, I would say that there's plenty of things people can do, really, but the most important thing is to allow yourself to feel and have everything that you feel be okay. Frequently, what we do is we resist what we feel, and we focus on thinking, and we overthink and overanalyze everything. So I would say, just as a starting point, is allow life to be simple. Trust your deeper feelings, and just allow yourself to be guided by them. And you might find that, as a starting point, life is a little bit more pleasant, and your suffering is reduced, because overthinking and overanalyzing tend to be a significant contributor to our suffering. So as a general point to anyone out there that's either just looking to feel better in life or dealing with a health challenge, as a starting point, allow everything you feel to be okay. What you feel is never a problem. What you feel never needs to be solved. It's just a feedback tool, it's a feedback mechanism, and it's just guiding you. So allow yourself to, if you can believe that you have a true self inside you, there's a real you, there's a consciousness, an energy flowing through you that's looking to guide you. So allow yourself to be guided by that. And if I can just say, with the website, it's Kyle Davis, so it's or if you're listening in the US, it's Kyle Davies. So that's KYLEDAVIES.net.
Thank you for being in tune with Best Talk Show, Carry On Harry, with entertainment editor Harry Johal on Bala Bala Radio, inviting music composers, producers, artists on board on Carry On Harry Talk Show for connecting you to worldwide audience. Write to Harry Johal at carryonharry.com or visit www.carryonharry.com for more details.